Okay, Jamel, if you had to tell your story in 140 characters or less, how do you do it?
Oh gosh, just hit me with one right out the gate that I can't possibly answer. 140 characters or less. I probably would just say, luckiest woman on earth. I mean, I never imagined. I grew up in Detroit, and as I tell people, to borrow a Jay-Z line, I grew up in the real hood, not the rap hood. And so, because of that, to go from there to being on television every day, working for ESPN, I'm officially living the dream.
What led you to choosing a career in journalism?
Well, gather around the campfire kiddies, but back in the day, we used to actually have to read the newspaper to keep up with our favorite sports team. And so I was a huge Tigers fan growing up, and I read both newspapers, the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press. It's also something that's probably a little foreign these days, is actual two newspaper towns. So anyway, I read the papers every day to find out what was going on with my favorite team. And I fell in love with newspapers. I fell in love specifically with the sports section. And once I got to high school, I just knew that that was what I wanted to pursue. I always loved writing, I always loved reading. I was curious, so I had, stubborn. I had all the perfect qualities to be a journalist.
What about your print career helped you get ready for the jump to TV when you made it?
Well, I think the beauty of doing print is that, that's where I kind of really cut my teeth as a reporter. I was a college football and college basketball beat writer for 6 years. I was a general assignment sports reporter for 2 years. I spent 2 years as a sports columnist. So you learn how to, gather information, network, develop sources. And so you see all these various situations, and the people that you cover along the way, some of them wind up in the NBA or the NFL, or they become coaches, GMs. And so, you look up and you're on television and you've already built this incredible network. So it's people you can call to find out, okay, what's really going on with this situation, or it's, games that you've covered or just been in the environment long enough that you develop an authority. You use your experience and you apply it to all the situations that you talk about on TV. So from a reporting standpoint, it definitely prepared me. And also in terms of understanding how to put together a story. I mean, television is a visual medium, as everybody knows, and even when we're discussing topics, how we present the topic visually, what clips we decide to show or what interviews we decide to show. I mean, that's all based off our journalistic training of understanding, what elements are important, your news judgment. So there were a lot of very, transferable elements, and I know I wouldn't nearly be as good on TV if not having had that experience as a print journalist.
You mentioned being able to work on these stories. What's maybe your favorite story, or maybe the biggest one you've been on?
Well, as a television, host, I would say, we were on air when when LeBron decided to go back to Cleveland, and they wound up extending our program for an additional hour. So we talked about one guy for an entire hour, but it was not, we had stuff we left on the table. And so that was, you more or less, for me, I categorize it by, particular news events, like, okay, where were you when this happened, when that happened? There's been a lot of stuff that we've been able to cover that I'm really, proud of. Certain conversations that we had about, race or gender, the conversation we had about Missouri, about, one of my favorite conversations we had is when Richard Sherman had some thoughts he wanted to share on Black Lives Matter, and we had a great conversation about that on TV. Freddie Gray, a lot of, sports has changed so much in this element. Like when I first got into the business, you didn't talk about, race and sports or gender and, all these heavier elements, domestic violence. You didn't talk about these kind of issues in a sports, kind of spectrum. But nowadays, those issues are so, much more well covered than they were before, and a lot of publicity, as it should be. And so now this idea that, sports is the toy department doesn't exist anymore. And that used to be the case when I first kind of got into business. So, for me, anytime we can use our platform to get to deeper issues, those are always proud moments for me.
Is the change in how you're able to cover and talk about issues in sports the biggest challenge from print to TV, or what is?
That's that's a challenge, but it's only a challenge in that you want to talk about it, fairly, responsibly, and honestly. And a lot of people aren't able to do that. And I feel very proud and fortunate that my co-host and I, given our respective, reporting experiences and our life experiences, we bring as much credibility to those conversations as anyone. I think the most difficult part about the transition from print to TV is really learning all the TV stuff. I did not major in broadcast journalism. I majored in print journalism. And we used to laugh at TV reporters and TV anchors. And we thought it was so easy until I started doing it every day. And the challenge is that you is keeping yourself mentally fresh to have an opinion every single day on everything. And learning the nuances of television, when to cut yourself off, how if you make a mistake, just to own it, or just a lot of little nuanced things that I would bore everybody to death if I went over. But those are the things you have to learn how to do TV. Like, a lot of people have opinions, but can you perform that opinion? And that was the element I had to kind of figure out as I went along.
Well, how do you go about it, maybe in print and again in TV, how do you go about finding that creative story angle that kind of it gets as many people as possible interested?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially nowadays, there is a lot of attention being given to people who sort of yell the loudest. And so for me, I just never wanted to lose the nuance of every conversation. So I wasn't going to have some kind of crazy hot take. I wasn't going to become some kind of hot take machine with, all these, different opinions. So for me, I'm satisfied as long as I feel like, I discuss something in a, responsible way. In terms of the creativity comes in the angle in which you discuss it. And that's hard to do when you're on a platform at ESPN, because there's so many, shows, so many people. I mean, we're hitting you with volume. And so it's hard to find those conversations that, are a lot different. I mean, I would imagine that if we were, doing the show right after right after Oklahoma City, lost to Golden State on the buzzer beater, I would just guess we probably would have started with the fact that Russell Westbrook came to the game with a jersey from the Above the Rim movie, one of my favorite movies. So we would have probably talked about that and discussed how funny or cool or interesting that was. So it's like you have to find these like little things about bigger events. And while that's not the entire conversation, but the fact that you throw that in there is what makes it maybe a little bit different. Because at this point, we're not fooling anybody by talking about how great Steph Curry is. Everybody knows he's great. So maybe you want to discuss it from a historical standpoint, or maybe you want to discuss it, how he's probably the most relatable athlete, I think, since Michael Jordan. So it's all these different layers that you try to bring to a conversation that hopefully separate it from the thousands of others that people are hearing.
Is there a way to find sources who can maybe help you find one of these angles?
Well, I think and that's where your reporting network kind of comes into play. Is that you may be, look, for example, I was at NBA All-Star Weekend in Toronto, and there's been a lot of tension between Byron Scott and D'Angelo Russell, and having a conversation, I had a conversation with one of the coaches on the Lakers staff, and it kind of got me to slightly amend my opinion, because I'm thinking, okay, if you're Byron Scott, and why aren't you just playing this kid from day one and just living with the mistakes? But then I sort of made me look at it kind of like when you had that teacher that was always on you in school, and the reason they were on you is because they saw something in you, and they felt like you had an extraordinary amount of potential that they wanted you to live up to, but they didn't want to give you everything. And so it kind of helped me see the framework of their relationship in a different way, and also to understand that as much as we keep trying to put Kobe in this mentor role, physically he's not able to do that because he's so limited, and he has to conserve himself so much that really maintaining his body is probably the primary focus. So the kids that he's playing with, from Julius Randle to D'Angelo Russell, they're not even getting the benefit, I don't think the maximum benefit of being able to be exposed to Kobe. They're not getting the same treatment that Sasha Vujacic got when Kobe was abusing him in practice every day, and kind of learning from that standpoint. So I say all that to say, had I not had that conversation with that coach, then I think I probably would have felt the opposite about the situation. But being able to have that conversation, I'm like, you know what, I do see this. In talking to you, I do see this a little bit differently. So that's how it kind of helps you, maybe mature the opinion that you have.
Is there any advice you would give a graduating senior on how to build their network so that when they get out into the business, they can maybe find a story like that?
Well, I would say the main thing is that, regardless of the different technologies, be it social media or TV, whatever is the method you will deliver the information, how you get it and how you cultivate it doesn't change, and it hasn't changed since the birth of journalism, which is our job is to tell people things they don't know, is to develop sources, and do all those things. So focus on the craft, focus on the reporting, and realize that if you want to eventually get on TV, get your own show, you're not going to graduate and jump to being on PTI. Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon, they were reporters and columnists for 30 years. That's how they are able to develop the relationships they have, and while when they're on TV talking about sports, they know what they're talking about because 9 times out of 10 they either covered it or know the parties that are involved. So understand that your career, if you start off say reporting on high school sports, well, eventually some of those athletes might go to college and they might become big time college athletes, or that high school coach, he may eventually become a GM down the line or become an NFL coach. So you constantly just build your network so that once you do get to the point where you do have a big platform, you'll know what you're talking about. But in the meantime, you've got to focus on doing the work. And if you focus on that, the rest kind of takes care of itself.
For those of us on the job hunt, I know I graduate this semester and I'm not the only one.
Okay.
What kind of advice do you have?
I would say, be open. Don't limit yourself to a certain region of the country. Don't even limit yourself to a particular sport. I mean, when I graduated from college, as I mentioned, I was a general assignment sports reporter. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, working for the News and Observer. I mean, I covered women's soccer. I covered, I feel like I covered some of everything. Because you may want to be, say, an NBA writer. I'm not saying this is your dream, but you may want to cover the NBA one day or cover the NFL, but you may not start there. But don't think that those experiences, if you don't start off in the field or covering the beat you want to cover, that they're not just as valuable. So don't limit yourself, apply for a job on the West Coast, apply for the job on the East Coast, the South. Like, don't limit yourself by region, because, everybody wants to work in Chicago. Everybody wants to work in New York. Everybody wants to work in Miami. Go where no one wants to work, because you'll be shocked at how many opportunities are there. And think development first. Think about, I tell people this all the time because of course I'm constantly asked about, well, I want to work at ESPN. How do I get to ESPN? Easy. Don't try to work for ESPN. That's how you get there. Because if you come there when you're, let's say you want to be an on-air talent, we don't stick interns on TV. There's a reason why everybody you see on TV, they come from other places. So you're better off, instead of thinking like, oh, I got to wind up at this really big place right out of school. No, go to a smaller place and develop and get the reps and learn, so that a place like us will be forced to pay you a lot of money later on down the line because you've learned so much. So just think about, does this developmentally, does this get me to where I want to be? And I guarantee you'll wind up in a good place.
Changing perspectives a little bit, kind of going to it more from the fan perspective. How did being a sports fan growing up help you in your job?
Well, I think it helps in the sense that, maybe your curiosity, things that you've always wanted to know as a fan or know how certain things work. It helped me from that standpoint. But the more you get into sports, and certainly because the journalism part of it for me was more attractive than the sports part of it, if that makes any sense, you're gonna lose your fandom. Like, it's not going to be the same as when you were 12 or 13 and staring at the Jordan poster on the wall. It's not gonna be the same, because you learn how the steak is made, and sometimes that steak isn't very pretty, So I think what happens is, and this is again where the journalism part of it is the bigger thing. Like, if you're a really big sports fan, I would say don't go into sports writing, right? It's like a movie critic, You love movies, don't be a movie critic, So what you have to, what you're eventually a fan of are stories. You're a fan of things being compelling, of drama, of tension. And that's all a big part of journalism. And that same watchdog mentality, is there. And so for me, that was the part that really kind of lured me and kept me, in journalism. It wasn't really the fan stuff. And, being frank, what happens is as you're covering these things and covering different teams, you actually learn to kind of hate fans a little bit. But it's okay. You understand them. But you do. And I had a conversation with Linda Cohn about this, and I think she's phenomenal. And she's one of the few people in our industry who has been able to maintain that kind of childish love for sports. I mean, I think in all of us, that's got to be there, where you have to be a fan of competition, and a fan of all the drama and all the miracles that we see in sports. Never let that part of it get old. And so for me, that's probably the only one of the few carryover elements that I've had as a reporter from when I was a fan as a child.
As a fan, every fan's had to cope with that stretch where their team is just awful. Is there any advice you might have in how to help those fans cope in the industry, or even to the fans on how to cope with that stretch?
But you know what? It helps you because if you've been through that stretch as a fan, it does help you understand it when you see, the fan base of the Cleveland Browns, and you understand, you've been there. But the beauty is in the struggle, because if ever one day that team is actually good, it's like it's a parade. It's a nonstop parade. Talk to a Boston Red Sox fan before they actually started winning and becoming, ironically enough, more like the Yankees in terms of spending. But talk to them before that. I mean, yeah, it was miserable and it sucked, especially because your rival is so good. But for them, the day that they put the Yankees out the playoffs after being down 0-3, that had to be like the greatest thing they've ever experienced. And so that's the part that's got to keep you going, is knowing that one day it may be different. I mean, Cubs fans, same thing. It's like they're getting closer. They're actually, to me, a year ahead of schedule. But if they win the World Series, that will make the last 3,000 years or however long they've been bad seem like it didn't even exist. So you got to live the hope and the optimism of it. Look, at some fan bases, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how. I don't know why you're a Browns fan. I don't understand why you haven't given up at some point. But I admire it, because that is true loyalty.
Would you say maybe the message that you could give those fans is don't give up?
Keep dreaming. Keep believing, because one day it's going to turn around, hopefully. Everybody has their day. I mean, I as a Michigan State fan, for example, I went to Michigan State, and when I was there in college, the football team, we thought we were doing something by getting to the Independence Bowl. Right, 6-6 was about as good as we could get. 7-5, I saw so many 5-6, 6-6. We lost to Central Michigan at home. I saw some brutally bad losses. Now I turn around, yeah, sure, we got stumped out by Alabama, but to imagine that Michigan State would be in a position where they're considered one of the top football programs, where we would beat Michigan 7 of the last 8 years as we've done, nobody saw that coming. So it's like, if you didn't give up, then it wouldn't feel as sweet as it does, kind of right now. So, yeah, don't stop believing.
You mentioned being a Michigan State fan. Was your favorite sports memory while you were in school? Is it while you've been in the business? Where does it?
Favorite sports memory? It probably, because it was a bizarre road for me, because I actually grew up a Michigan fan, and a lot of people in Detroit did, so that wasn't unusual, because Detroit is closer to Ann Arbor. So it's only like 35 minutes away. And understand, when I was in high school, the Fab Five was in college, so everybody loved, Michigan, and they were the far more consistently successful program in the state at that point. So I went to Michigan State not because I loved the sports programs. I went because they had a great journalism school. So I was there for academic, reasons. So while I was in school, I really didn't love Michigan State sports that much. It was I wanted them to be successful, but it wasn't like this die-hard thing for me. And then I covered them for 6 years as a professional, so I really wasn't all that attached. But what happens is, the further distance you have from something, and when I would move along this journalism path, the one connective tissue I could come back to was Michigan State. It became the reason why me and my friends would get together every year for a tailgate, for a game, or something like that. So, I became a rabid fan, because I don't have to cover them anymore. I'm not, I can wear my heart on my sleeves as far as they're concerned. So, the memory part. probably in recent years, it's like when we beat Stanford a couple of years ago in the Rose Bowl. That was incredible. And just to see their success with beating Michigan this year on that crazy punt, like it's like that's one I was yelling in the middle of an airport, like losing my mind when that happened. So it returns me to a point in time and a joy that, again, that you kind of lose over time in this business because you're focused on the journalism part. So, Michigan State has become like a great relief, a great connection for me to remember what it is like to be a true, unabashed, blindly loyal sports fan.
You mentioned that while you were in school, Michigan State struggled. How do you go about maybe covering a struggling team without printing or airing the same story day in and day out?
Believe it or not, that's actually, I think it's harder to do that than say covering a stupidly winning team. Like if you're covering Golden State, like how many times are you gonna say Steph Curry's great? Like it's like, all right, he's doing historical things that are ridiculous on a nightly basis. When you're covering a losing team, I would say usually there's a lot of drama around it. And so when I covered Michigan State, the football team, it was a lot of drama. Coach got fired. There was a quarterback who wound up going to rehab during the season. It was a lot of things going on. But from a journalism standpoint, there's a lot of juice there. It's a lot of digging to be done. So it was always a different layer to the drama. I think the main thing, you have to do in protecting against when you're covering a losing team is just being super aware of what the agendas are, because that's when people are losing their jobs and their livelihoods are changing right before you, and so you have to be responsible in that, because you're going to hear all kind of rumors and you have to be able to sort through the mess. But in terms of creatively saying they're bad, there's a lot of fun in that. Actually, it's not fun to talk to people who are disheartened and grumpy all the time. Yeah, that part is true. So you kind of have to, get used to the attitudes. But you get a lot of creativity out of describing something that's awful. So,
you covered a coaching change. Now that's something that, say, like I grew up a Spurs fan. I haven't had to go through a coaching change in my lifetime. How do you go about covering a coaching change and remaining sensitive to the coach who just lost his job and he has to uproot his family, but at the same time informing the fans of, hey, this is why he lost his job and here's who they're looking at?
Yeah, and it was a very dramatic coaching change too. But for me, as much as I personally liked the coach that was fired, knew his whole family, the situation was what it was. The team, it felt like they quit on him. And not because of him in particular. It's like the losing just kind of got to everybody, and it just ate itself from the inside out. So, I just tried to be fair and, report what I knew, not theorize about what I thought to be true, but couldn't factually necessarily prove. And that's why I said you got to be aware of the agendas, because there will be a lot of people when a coach is fired telling you, oh, he got fired because of this. Oh, no, it's because of this. Like, so there's a lot of different directions you can go, and you have to try your best to sort through it and to understand what the agendas are. Who's protecting who? Who's trying to cover for who? How far up does this go? And of course, you'll have to cover a coaching search and understand the agendas there. There's one faction of boosters that might want this guy, one faction that might want this guy. What's realistic? What's actually possible? So yeah, I mean, I think if you're fair, then you really don't have anything, to worry about, because it's not my job to worry about the coach's family. I can be fair to his family, but it's not my job to worry about them. It's my job to tell the reader something that they didn't know and to put the whole situation into context.
In a story like that, if you have a source who comes to you off the record, says this is happening, is there any way you've experienced to be able to get them to go on the record so you can run that story?
Oh, I mean, you try to get them on the record first. I mean, assuming that it's somebody, credible enough that if they said it, on the record, that people are like, okay, then this is really happening. Nobody wants to go on the record and when a coach is fired. But whether or not I go with the information depends on how much I trust the source. And, if it's somebody that I trust, somebody who's never misled me before, somebody I know, even if they have an agenda, but I know their agenda isn't at conflict with my reporting, then it's fine. Then I'll just go for it. Sometimes, usually when a coach is fired, unless it's an unusual circumstance, you see it coming. And in this case, it was, I think it was after another particularly bad loss. I think Michigan State had lost to Michigan, I think. And I think that was the year they lost to them 49-3, if I'm not mistaken. And somebody asked the coach if he had lost the team, and he said, I don't know. And everybody knew that guy's getting fired. You can't deliver that answer. And so now, after he says that, you just start piecing it together, and you start hitting up your sources and saying, hey, is this job safe, or is it not safe, or what's going on? And you kind of go from there.
To wrap things up, kind of a deeper question. In classes here, they always teach us about the glass ceiling effect, that it affects all sides. As not only a woman in this industry, but a minority woman, what's your experience been like in an industry dominated by men?
Well, there are certain things that you have to deal with that your male counterparts don't have to deal with, and even white women don't have to necessarily deal with, that you have to develop a thick skin to deal with that. I have never really felt like I had a ceiling, but I see that the ceiling exists. And I talk about this all the time with television in particular for all women, but it is especially for women of color, is that your TV life has you got a window. And generally speaking, women aren't allowed we don't grow old on TV. You know what I mean? It's like they're your replacement, your younger, in some cases better looking replacement is going to come walking through the door, because we are still judged a lot visually as opposed to our expertise, information, or perspective that we can offer. And you have to be realistic about that being a very living, breathing part of this business. So for me, I think this is where my background has helped, in the sense that I had a print background. There is a heavy respect for print journalists and putting print journalists on TV. So I feel like that ceiling that exists is a little different for me. Given that I'm one of the few women who's been able to put themselves in a space where I'm driving a show with my opinion. I'm not just an anchor. I'm offering commentary as well. And I think that's the next evolution of this business that has to come for women and women of color, is that we got to be put in positions where shows are being built around us, and not just there to tee up guys and hear what they have to say, but to offer our own point of view and contribute to the conversations. But unfortunately, I still think that too much in our business, there is this disbelief by executives who make decisions that people wouldn't want to listen to a woman, or this idea because we haven't played, we can't credibly talk about the game, even though for most guys that are on TV talking about it, the non-athletes, that is what I'm speaking of, their careers ended in high school if they even had one that was credible. So, I just think we just kind of have to graduate to that part of it, and not automatically, even though I did do sideline reporting, not automatically sort of push women to do that, to put us in some, different spaces. But yeah, you're going to be judged differently. Like, I could mess up a stat on TV and I'll get 100 people on Twitter telling me this is why women shouldn't talk sports. My co-host, who's a man, does the same thing. He's just an idiot. That's it. It's not related to, his gender. So you have to be prepared that people will respond to you a little harshly. You'll be probably criticized and judged more for certain things that you've said because, you're a woman, or in my case, because you're a black woman. So, you have to prepare yourself for that. But it should never be a reason for you not to keep going if that's what you want to do.
Keeping that in mind, for someone who all they've ever wanted to do, be it in a newspaper, on the radio, on TV, in any format, for someone who's only ever wanted to tell people about news or about sports, what do you say?
In terms of advice, or we just talking about
what kind of advice, what kind of push would you give someone?
Only thing I would tell them is know what you don't know. And I think there can be I think a lot of journalists, especially younger journalists, you feel too much pressure to be an expert at everything. And I tell women this too, that sometimes get a little intimidated or feel like if they're in the presence of a coach or a player, that if they have a basic question about what they're saying, that somehow that's going to reflect poorly on them. None of us journalists, we're not, I mean, we develop an expertise, but we're not experts. So don't be afraid to acknowledge what you don't know, because I guarantee you somebody out there, if you're thinking it and you have that question, there are 1,000 people out there that have that same question. So don't be afraid to ask it. I think we get into trouble when we don't acknowledge what we don't know, and that's how we wind up misguiding readers and viewers and that sort of thing. And then I would just say beyond that, if sports is something that you've always wanted to do, then do that. I mean, this is a profession. You can't dip your toe in the shallow end. You got to jump fully in. All right, so you can't do this half measure. You know, it requires the level of sacrifice and commitment and dedication that it requires is high. It's not for everybody. And everybody isn't cut out to do it. So if you get in it and even you feel like, hey, this isn't for me, then that's fine, because again, it's not for everybody. But once you make that decision to do it full bore and do it with the passion and intensity that got you, that made you drawn to it in the first place.
Jemele, thank you very much for sitting down
Thank
with me.
you.
I really
Appreciate it.
appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.